One of those songs that Robert and I kind of came up with before we actually had a record deal when we were working across the street from one another. And the lyrics to this song were actually inspired by a true story. A girl whose name I won't mention was kidnapped and then later found, tragically murdered. Back in the early part of the 90s. And so it sort of like gave me sort of fuel to, to write the words of the song. However, this song is not about that, really. It's about, it's sort of a metaphor for a lost obsessive relationship. And I don't think anyone here has ever heard this song before.
So these were the words of Scott Weiland on an episode of VH1 Storytellers from March 8th, 2000. And I want to try and find that kidnapping case. So typically here on this channel, I have a particular story behind the song. And it's exactly what you may think. There's a particular story, and one way or another, it's tied to a song. And I would also use the term, it could be directly or indirectly. And for today's video, this is just about as direct and indirectly as it gets. This is going to be one of the more out there stories I've ever done. Mostly because I typically cover music on this channel. So whether it's discovering a new band, new song, and just talk about music. I never thought I would be doing a true crime case. And I guess there's a first time for everything. Given the weight of this, I'm definitely out of my element here. So I do want to make this very clear. This isn't really my forte. I'm fully aware that there is going to be certain information I'm probably going to overlook. But most importantly of all, I think I'm going to get the case wrong for the most part. Now, at the very least, I would probably just do an update with story behind the song. I usually have a documentary and I do a reaction to the song in question. And I am going to do that same structure here, but I think I'm not going to call this story behind the song because the weight of the situation, because it is direct and indirect at the same time. It's very odd. Most importantly of all, I do feel very uncomfortable when talking about just normal civilians. It's one thing to cover a band and something that happened to them directly. That I kind of don't care about because it's a public figure and it's most likely their story to be told. But when you just deal with everyday people, I kind of feel a little uncomfortable talking about it. Mostly because I think some of that just stems from me. Obviously, doing this channel, I'm my own public figure in a way, but at the same time, when the camera's off, I want to go back to my normal life. Obviously, I'm going to be telling this story, but at the same time, I don't want to dig too deep to where it feels like it's an invasion of privacy, if that makes any sense. Or at least that's just how I feel. Because I usually do 2 parts, there is a chance I may end up doing a 3rd part to just kind of clarify any overlooked or missed information. But if worse comes to worse, I'm going to let it be known now. There is a chance I will nuke this entire video. It would just cause more of a headache than anything, and I would just rather wash my hands clean and not have to deal with any of it. But given the circumstances, I will say this would make for, at the very least, an interesting conversation. I want to do everything right. I hope I have all my information, but also at the same time, this is also so vague that I could potentially be dealing with the wrong case, which is why I hope that maybe some of you could possibly even help me out. If you think I got the wrong case, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments, and maybe, like I say, I might even have to do an update on this video. But I think I have the right case, and I think I have everything down. Given the weight and sensitivity of how severe the crime that we're going to be covering, I gotta say, I deeply feel for the victims and their family. This was definitely a hard research to go through. I'm not gonna lie. I think I cried multiple times during research. I wouldn't be surprised if emotions get the better of me in this one. There's a level of just straight anger of how somebody could do this to an individual, and a child nonetheless. Some level of hopelessness at times, to where it's just, maybe it's me putting myself in the victim's shoes kind of type of thing, of like, you want to do something but you feel like you can't. Since we are talking about a very serious case and real people on top of that, I do want to make this very clear that this video is for educational purposes only. And I heavily recommend do your own research. And since we're on the topic, I heavily implore, do not hunt down any of the victims, the families, because they truly have been through enough. And to have random people contact them online, do not do it. I do want to respect the privacy of the families and the victims, so I'm going to be trying my best to not show any of the faces of the victims or the families in this video. There's going to be plenty of videos and different people talking about this particular topic online who probably don't really care about that kind of type of stuff that much. And I do understand the high profile of the case that we're going to be going over, and I do understand that it's been documented, researched multiple times over, but that still doesn't mean I feel responsible and a somewhat of a arbiter of information here. So I still want to be respectful to the families and everything. So, with all that said, how do we find this case? Where do we start? Where do we go? What do we do? Well, for one, let's start with the actual facts that we know. The song Plush was off the album from the Stone Temple Pilots in 1992. Specifically, it released in September, but they didn't start recording until May of 92. So in order to really find this particular case that Scott Weiland brought up in the VH1 Storytellers, we really do have to kind of cover essentially what took place before the album Core released. And even more specifically, I feel like if they start recording in May, I think I'm going to have May be the cutoff, because obviously we wouldn't really know the true details of when recording ended. And so there is going to be the recording side, and then there is going to be the hard print side of things. Vinyl, CDs, and what have you. I think to really narrow it down, I think I feel comfortable we have to find a case, more specifically the investigation of a case before May of 92. So the events could have taken place at any point in time before 92, but everything with the investigation needs to be wrapping up before of May of 92. That's where a lot of this becomes very difficult. The more further you go back, the more harder it is to find documents of certain cases. And that made this investigation even more harder. Staying with the details and facts, the story with the song Plush in particular, it was said that the band was staying at the Oakwood Apartments in San Diego, and they were all in a hot tub when they written the song Plush. As they were writing the song, they came across a particular newspaper article. And this is where the facts split, in my opinion. Because if you try to research this, everybody brings up that, well, the band is in San Diego. The case that we are trying to look for perhaps was in San Diego. And I see where a lot of people's thought process would go, mostly because if everything is local, that's the most logical option. However, I think there's a chance that that could actually be wrong. And this is quite possibly where I don't know how much of my information is correct and how much this is just what I think and feel. Again, if you think that you may have a better idea of the case than I do, and maybe there was information or a particular case that I overlooked, I would love to hear it down in the comments. So, sticking with the San Diego theory case, and I'm just going to do my due diligence here and just kind of speed everything up. To be blunt, I came across 3 particular cases. Sticking to Wikipedia, because at least that's what a lot of articles parrot from, because everyone says the band is from San Diego, so surely the case was also in San Diego. Since it's from a Wikipedia article, I decided I wonder if Wikipedia has any particular list of kidnappings that took place in the 90s. When I looked, this case was easily thrown out, mostly because the investigation didn't wrap up until 97. That wasn't the case that we would be looking for. And I should also maybe bring up, I'm going to go into more detail on the lyrics side of things, because the lyrics is what's gonna really sell the idea of this particular case and song connection. So I'm going to go into detail on that in part 2. Then there's a problem with the other 2 cases that I found in San Diego. And again, I do want to point this out. I did find dozens of cases, but there was either a problem with the timeline or there was a problem with the investigation, because there was certain details from the particular investigation that found its way into the lyrics. And more or less, this is also the reason why the other 2 stories I had to throw out as well. The details of the investigation didn't match with the lyrics. Whatever details of that particular information also was kind of vague, if I recall correctly as well. It was pretty much a name, a location, and the ending of the investigation, and that's more or less it. And again, all 3 cases was just very sad and hard to read at times. Again, it makes this all the more harder. So at least with my investigation of what I could find, I also did bring a friend in on this and see if they could help out with anything in particular, and more or less they kind of came to the same conclusion that I did as well. The only difference is the one case that we had the most information on is the case I'm going to be presenting to you. I'm going to consider going into more detail in part 2 on this. Essentially, I did have a hit, but not necessarily local. It wasn't even national. This was actually possibly international. And the case in question is actually the case of Karmein Chan.
Please bring my daughter Karmein back to home because all my family love her very much. Your favorite dress here, Karmein. Come back and dress it. Please release my daughter.
What if someone comes in, Mum?
There's a monster, and I think that's probably accurate.
How many young girls has he preyed on?
Lock up the doors, keep the children inside, and trust no one.
Now, in order to really break down the case of Karmein Chan, I actually need to go over 2 other cases. But because they are not relevant to the song Plush, I again am going to speed things up and not really go into any detail on those 2 other cases. So from here on out, we're going to be sticking to Karmein Chan and in Melbourne, Australia. So yeah, we ain't going to really be going into any detail with any other case, although I will be referencing 2 other cases that may or may not be connected to Karmein Chan. You'll see what I mean by that. And on that note, if I recall correctly, there could actually be far more cases than beyond the 3 that I just mentioned. Again, you will see what I mean as we go through everything. So, Karmein Chan, what happened? Well, for one, let's start with the actual suspect to all of this. The suspect to all of this, I should also maybe bring up, only because, at least here in the United States, there are people that are very, shall we say, unhinged and kind of insane. So I think for everyone's sake, I definitely want to try and be as minimal as I possibly can to the attacker, but at the same time, still try and be as informative as possible. So I'm gonna try and avoid mention any names or anything like that, because truly I kind of feel like if there should be any spotlight, it should be on the victims. At least that's my logic. The status of the attacker and how the attacker operates. This attacker is a serial attacker. This is one of the reasons why I said there's probably more beyond the 3 that I just mentioned. This attacker, he's not dumb. He's someone that is methodical and attacks at the most opportune time what's best for him. The attacker is a man, and he definitely always tries to wear some form of headgear, and he's typically a ski mask or a balaclava, kind of wielding either a knife or a gun. And the times he would attack his victims would typically be late at night, either when the family is completely asleep or when the parents are not home. Because of this, it sent a particular scare and shock to all the people, not just in Melbourne, but in Australia as well.
Any parent that lived through that period will tell you that they probably changed the way what they let their children do.
I don't go out anywhere unless she comes with me. She doesn't even go to babysitters or anything. She's always with us.
he's woken up with nightmares. You know, what if someone comes in, Mum, and it's terrible. It's terrible for a 5-year-old to have to think like that.
A lot of children from this time period in the mid-'80s and early '90s all remember very vividly of not being left home alone, or their parents was more or less within earshot at most of the time, always making sure to have their doors locked at night. And the way the attacker would carry themselves is they would stake out the victim's home, waiting for the right time to strike. Once the individual breaks into the place, he would then subdue his victims and the entire family. Once they are tied up, he would then go through the property. He would look for clothing, money, and whatever valuables he could take with him, either to sell off or keep as trophies. And then once he's done going through the victim's home, he then picks his prey and then escorts them off the property to a location of his choosing. To which, well, I can't really say what the guy does, but I think a soft way to put it is forced intimacy. And then once he's done, he would then release the victims back to their family. For Karmein, her parents actually owned 2 restaurants in town locally. Obviously, running 2 restaurants, it wasn't uncommon for Karmein's parents to be, from being away from home late at night, having to, well, if the business closed, there's still workstations that need to be cleaned, numbers that need to be crunched from the day's take, maybe even properly securing that money, whether in a safe or a bank, just the normal everyday operations of just running a business. And for Karmein, she was the older sister of 3. She had to look out for her 2 younger sisters, and it wasn't uncommon for her to have to babysit her 2 little sisters. And with that, here's what happened. So late one night, it was believed that Karmein was having to babysit her 2 sisters, and they were actually sitting down to watch a Marilyn Monroe TV special, most likely a documentary. One of Karmein's younger sisters, she excused herself. She was thirsty, wanted a drink of water, and she went to the kitchen. And that is when she saw him. Standing in the kitchen, armed with a knife, she said that the stitching of the mask looked very menacing. The man then ordered all the sisters into a room, to which he would then lock the door. The 2 younger sisters, their nightmare with their attacker, more or less came to an end here. As for Karmein, it was just beginning. Karmein would be escorted off the property. It is also completely unknown whether he did this on the way in to the Chan family home, or he did this while he left with Karmein. Because on the property of the Chan family home, there was a red Toyota.
For a blunt, spray-painted message left behind by the abductor.
The family Toyota parked at the front of the house had been daubed with slogans saying "Payback, more to come," and a reference to Asian drug money.
It was believed that Karmein Chan's father, John Chan, was actually connected to some criminal underworld.
I knew Phyllis Chan before the abduction. I knew her afterwards. I live in Eltham and dined at her restaurant a number of times. I don't for one moment think she was involved in any way in drugs.
What about John Chan, her husband?
I don't know so much about John, and he took off fairly quickly after the killing of Karmein, so I really don't know enough about John.
This is also something that I may have left out prior, but another thing that is this particular serial attacker would have left behind potential false leads on purpose to lead investigators down a rabbit hole with no conclusion. One of the victims, while still at home, she remembers while being blindfolded that she distinctly recall that her attacker actually picked up a phone and made a phone call. And this is, of course, back in a time period to where cell phones wasn't a thing. And of course, that was during the time period to where phones still had cords attached to them. And it was a known fact that the attacker did sever the line, making a phone call impossible. It is possible he did make a phone call, but he was making it to himself. A different victim, the victim's family, actually received a ransom letter that left the family kind of worried about even being able to come up with the money in time properly. This, of course, was completely meaningless, as their daughter would be released and she would find her way back to her family. And then for Karmein Chan, the false lead or red herring would be the red Toyota. And much like the other victims, Karmein Chan would also end up being found, but not alive.
A man walking his dogs through this industrial desert in Melbourne's north stumbled across a skull on Thursday evening. It had several bullet wounds in the side. After further investigations, police recovered the rest of the body, and although they're yet to establish an identity, they're confident they know who it is.
Whilst we don't have any positive information at this point in time, it is quite a possibility that it is in fact Karmein.
It was said that a local out walking their dog came across a particular dumping site just a stone's throw away from where Karmein Chan actually lived. The local's dog went over to a garbage pile and started digging into the ground, and it was said that the dog may have actually gnawed a bit on Karmein's body. Police were called in. It didn't take long for a press conference to be held. Police even stated, "We need results to come back from the lab, but we heavily suspect this is the body of Karmein Chan." The test results would come back from the lab, and it would confirm this is the final resting site for Karmein Chan. What really makes a lot of the research and all these stories just sad and bring me to tears, and I even feel it right now. There are, when it comes to the cases to where you actually do find a suspect, it's one of those things to where all of this didn't need to happen, but at the very least you could say you found the person, you brought them to justice, and they need to pay for what they did. This case, and to the other two victims and potentially more, this case is completely unsolved. It is actually completely unknown if this particular serial attacker is actually even connected to Karmein. Mostly because with Karmein, more or less, these attacks stopped. But for those that microanalyze, know of certain behaviors with these kind of types of attacks, the urge to do this is typically always there, and they're going to do it again. And it's heavily believed that because this is unsolved, this serial attacker just went to another town, perhaps maybe even left Australia altogether. the high profile of this particular case, it put people connected to the Karmein case in a weird spot. To actually look a victim's family saying that we are trying everything, we're doing all that we can, but having to show for 0 results in the end. It is because of Karmein Chan there have been laws against certain prawn, or shall we say, pornography. I know, I have to kind of clean things up for YouTube. And it is because of this particular attack there have been certain laws that went into the books because of this for the entire country of Australia. The fact that this particular attacker is unknown and no one really knows what actually happened makes this case all the more sad in the end. So for Karmein, it's unknown if this was the same attacker, someone completely different. It's also possible, and the logic that some people think why Karmein's case is so different from the others is it is a known fact that the attacker would always blindfold his victims. And for the young 13-year-old Karmein, it is suspected that maybe she was the one that actually didn't cooperate with her attacker. There is a theory that maybe she took off her blindfold, or perhaps even unmasked her attacker, seeing more than what she should have. The attacker, knowing that this one probably saw too much than what she should have, that could have possibly been the thing that sealed Karmein's fate. And it's also really sad when one of the previous victims' families, I believe it was the father, actually said that he felt responsible, that he couldn't do more, and that he failed as a father, and that he failed his family, not having to be the one to protect them. And I don't blame anybody for thinking that way, but I also think that no one thinks the worst of the worst is about to happen. I think for most of us, we would probably think that, oh, this is just going to be a robbery. I don't think anyone thinks that, oh, it's going to be something beyond just a robbery. And going back to Karmein, the police investigation was more or less wrapping up. At one point, police investigators actually extracted Karmein's skull, and they were able to determine that there was 3 bullet holes to the head, indicating a quintessential execution style. The police would end up wrapping up their investigation. Karmein's mother and her 2 sisters would end up doing a Buddhist ceremony, complete with peace offerings and gifts for Karmein for the afterlife. As they say goodbye,